Northern Wisconsin, October 28th, 1979. The first frost had already claimed the pumpkin vines when Dale Harrigan announced his plan to the regulars at Metzger's Hardware. He was going to build a hunting shelter 12 feet off the ground and heat it with nothing but metal ducts running from a stone firebox below. The room went silent. Then someone laughed. "You'll freeze to death up there," said Vernon Mills, a carpenter with 30 years of cabin building under his belt. "Heat rises, sure, but not through 12 feet of cold air in November." Dale didn't argue. He just smiled that quiet smile of his and ordered another 60 feet of salvaged ductwork. What did this soft-spoken machinist understand about thermal dynamics that experienced builders missed? And why would he risk his life testing a theory most considered impossible? If you're watching from somewhere cold right now, drop a comment and tell me where you're from. And if you want to see how Dale proved everyone wrong, hit that subscribe button. I promise you'll learn something that could save your life in the backcountry. Let's get into it. Dale Harrigan wasn't the kind of man who drew attention. At 42, he worked second shift at the Marinette paper mill, kept his lawn trimmed, and spent November through January in the woods chasing white-tailed deer. His neighbors knew him as reliable, quiet, maybe a little too fond of tinkering in his garage. But in the fall of 1979, Dale became the talk of Eagle River for all the wrong reasons. The problem started innocently enough. Dale owned 40 acres of mixed hardwood forest 8 miles west of town. Good deer country, but brutally cold once the Canadian air settled in. For years, he'd hunted from a plywood ground blind, spending miserable hours huddled over a Coleman catalytic heater that barely kept his fingers functional. Then, during a particularly frigid morning in January 1979, watching his breath crystallize in the dim light, Dale had what he would later call a stupid idea that wouldn't leave me alone. What if he could hunt from above, where scent dispersed better and sight lines opened up, but still capture the heat from a proper fire below? Not a dangerous open flame in an elevated platform, but heat channeled upward through a controlled pathway. He sketched the concept on a feed store receipt. A stone firebox at ground level, insulated metal ducts rising through the platform's hollow supports, and a cast iron register plate to radiate warmth across the floor of his elevated shelter. When he showed the drawing to his brother-in-law, a heating contractor, the man actually laughed out loud. "Dale, you can't fight thermodynamics. Any heat you push up those ducts will bleed out before it reaches 12 feet. You'd burn a quart of wood a night and still wake up frozen." But Dale had worked with industrial furnaces at the mill. He understood draft, convection, and insulation. He knew something they didn't, or at least he thought he did. The real question was whether he was brilliant or just stubborn enough to freeze, proving himself wrong. Dale began construction in early September, when the ground was still soft enough to dig. The first thing he built wasn't the platform, it was the firebox. He excavated a pit 3 feet deep and lined it with salvaged firebrick from a demolished bakery. The combustion chamber measured 18 inches wide by 24 inches deep, with a hinged iron door he'd welded from quarter-inch plate steel. But the critical element was the throat, a 10-inch opening at the back of the firebox that fed directly into the main vertical duct. For the ducts themselves, Dale used 8-inch galvanized HVAC pipe, the kind designed for commercial furnace installations. He'd acquired nearly 70 feet of it from a demolished school building, including 2 45-degree elbows and a straight vertical run. Here's where his mill experience proved crucial. Instead of running the duct exposed through open air, Dale wrapped each section in 2 inches of fiberglass insulation, then enclosed the entire assembly inside a hollow wooden support post. The platform rested on 4 such posts, but only one contained the active heat duct. The others were structural decoys. At the top, where the duct terminated inside the platform, Dale installed a cast iron floor register, the old-fashioned kind with adjustable louvers. He positioned it dead center in the 8 by 10-foot platform, surrounded by a 16-inch square of soapstone tiles he'd mortared into place. The soapstone was the secret ingredient. At 400 pounds for that small section, it would absorb radiant heat from the register and release it slowly, long after the fire below had died to coals. The entire system operated on a simple principle: A well-fed fire in an insulated firebox creates intense heat and a strong draft. That draft pulls fresh air in through vents at the firebox base and pushes hot gases upward through the insulated duct. Because the duct loses minimal heat to the surrounding cold air, the hot gases arrive at the platform register still carrying 70 to 80% of their original thermal energy. On paper, it was elegant. In practice, according to every experienced builder in Eagle River, it was a fantasy. Vernon Mills put it bluntly when he saw the half-finished platform. You're building a chimney that dumps heat into a wooden box 12 feet up. That's not a shelter, Dale. That's kindling with a view. By mid-October, Dale's Treehouse furnace had become a running joke at the corner tap. Hunters stopping in for Friday fish fry would ask if he'd installed an elevator to carry firewood up to his penthouse. Even Father Kowalski, who usually stayed out of such debates, gently suggested Dale reconsider before someone got hurt. The criticism wasn't just casual mockery, it was rooted in real experience. Martin Schaefer, a mason who'd built more than 40 fireplaces in the county, examined the firebox one Saturday morning and shook his head. Dale, I've been working with fire and stone since before you were born. You've got two problems here. First, that duct's going to act like a radiator, bleeding heat into the air around it before it ever reaches your platform. Second, even if some heat makes it up there, it'll vent right out through the walls. You can't hold heat in an uninsulated wooden box. Dale listened politely, then asked, "What if the duct doesn't lose much heat?" "It will," Schaefer said flatly. "Physics doesn't care what you want." The local conservation officer, a man named Gary Hoffman who'd spent 20 winters in the woods, was even more direct. "I've seen men die from hypothermia in shelters of hell of a lot more substantial than that. You get up there on a cold night, that fire goes out, and you're 12 feet up with no quick way down. That's not clever. That's dangerous." Even Dale's wife, Caroline, asked him point blank, "Is this really worth it? We could just buy you a good insulated blind." But Dale had already committed. He'd spent $340 on materials, a significant sum in 1979, and nearly 80 hours of labor. More than that, he'd done the math. He'd calculated heat loss, estimated BTU output, and accounted for draft efficiency. The engineers at the mill, where Dale worked, had taught him one crucial lesson. Most people confuse uncommon with impossible. Just because something hadn't been done locally didn't mean it couldn't work. Still, as November approached and temperatures began their relentless fall, even Dale felt the weight of doubt. What if they were right? What if he'd built an elaborate, expensive way to freeze to death in the woods? There was only one way to find out. The cold front arrived on November 11th, 1979, earlier and more savage than anyone had predicted. By dawn on November 12th, the temperature had dropped to minus 18 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills approaching minus 40. Dale woke at 4:30 a.m., made coffee, and checked the thermometer mounted outside his kitchen window. The mercury had retreated into the bulb. Caroline stood in the doorway, wrapped in her bathrobe. "You're not seriously going out there." "Best time to test it," Dale said quietly. "If it works now, it'll work all season." He loaded his truck with supplies, a full cord of split oak, a hatchet, fire-starting materials, a sleeping bag rated to minus 20, and, just in case, an emergency beacon radio. He told Caroline he'd check in by walkie-talkie every 2 hours. The drive to his property took 25 minutes on roads glazed with black ice. By the time he reached the access trail, the sun was just beginning to bruise the eastern horizon a dull gray. The platform stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness, frost shimmering on every exposed surface. Dale climbed the ladder, 12 feet felt like 100 in the cold, and dropped his gear through the hatch. Then he descended and began the most important part, building the fire. He'd learned fire management at the mill, where furnace efficiency could make or break a production run. He started with a base of crumpled newspaper and birch bark, built a teepee of pencil-thin kindling, then progressively larger splits. Once the kindling caught, he added 3-inch diameter oak splits, arranging them to maximize airflow through the firebox. Within 15 minutes, he had a roaring fire. Flames licked up toward the duct throat, and he could hear the distinctive sound of a strong draft. A low, steady whoosh as air rushed through the system. Dale closed the firebox door, leaving the air vents partially open, and climbed back up to the platform. The first sensation he noticed was absence. No immediate blast of heat, no dramatic change. The register plate in the floor was warm to the touch, but not hot. Doubt crept in. Then, over the next 20 minutes, something remarkable happened. The soapstone tiles around the register began to radiate warmth. Not the sharp, uncomfortable heat of a wood stove, but a gentle, persistent warmth that spread outward. Dale pulled out his thermometer. The platform interior registered 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, it was still -18. He fed the fire below every 45 minutes, each time climbing down, adding 2 splits of oak, adjusting the vents, then climbing back up. By 8 a.m., the platform interior had reached 60 degrees. By 10 a.m., 68 degrees. By noon, with the sun offering no meaningful warmth and the outside temperature still locked at -15, Dale's shelter registered 75 degrees Fahrenheit. He sat back, removed his outer coat, and keyed the walkie-talkie. "Caroline, you there?" "I'm here." "You okay?" "I'm sitting in my shirt sleeves," he said. "It's 75 degrees up here." There was a long pause. "Dale, it's 20 below." "I know," he said, "but it's working. If you're still watching, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me the coldest temperature you've ever experienced. And subscribe if you want to see the data that proved everyone wrong." We're just getting to the good part. Dale spent 3 consecutive nights in the platform during that November cold snap, and what he documented changed everything the local hunting community thought they knew about backcountry heating. The numbers were undeniable. On the coldest night, November 13th, when ambient temperature bottomed out at -22 degrees Fahrenheit, Dale's platform maintained an interior temperature of 73 degrees. That represented a 95-degree differential between inside and outside, achieved with nothing but a ground-level fire and insulated ductwork. But the real revelation was fuel efficiency. Vernon Mills, the skeptical carpenter, had predicted Dale would burn a cord of wood per night, trying to heat an elevated structure. The reality shocked everyone. Dale consumed approximately 40 pounds of split oak over a 12-hour period. His neighbor, hunting from a traditional ground blind with a barrel stove, burned nearly 90 pounds of wood during the same time frame and still woke to interior temperatures in the mid-30s. Dale was using less than half the fuel and achieving double the warmth. The secret lay in the thermal mass of the soapstone and the efficiency of the insulated duct system. While a conventional stove radiates heat in all directions, with much of it escaping through walls and roof, Dale's system delivered heat directly to a high-density thermal mass that absorbed it and released it slowly over hours. He conducted a simple test on the morning of November 14th. At 6 a.m., he let the fire die completely, reducing it to ash and a few glowing coals. Then he sealed the firebox door and monitored the platform temperature. At 6 a.m., 71 degrees. At 8 a.m., 68 degrees. At 10 a.m., 64 degrees. At noon, 60 degrees. 6 hours after the fire had effectively died, the platform was still 30 degrees warmer than a traditional heated shelter would have been 30 minutes after its stove went cold. The soapstone was performing exactly as Dale had calculated, acting as a thermal battery that stored heat and released it gradually through radiant transfer. Martin Schaefer, the mason who dismissed the project as thermodynamically impossible, came out to see it himself. Dale showed him the firebox, the insulated duct, and the temperature logs he'd kept. Schaefer examined the soapstone tiles, placed his hand on the register, and felt the warmth still radiating 6 hours after the last flame had died. He was quiet for a long moment. "I'll be damned," he finally said. "You didn't fight physics. You just used it better than the rest of us." The efficiency went beyond just fuel consumption and temperature maintenance. Because the fire was at ground level, Dale never had to worry about sparks, smoke accumulation, or the catastrophic risk of a stove fire inside a wooden structure 12 feet off the ground. The platform itself remained a clean, smoke-free environment. All combustion happened below, in a contained stone chamber that could be safely maintained even in the worst weather. And there was one more advantage nobody had anticipated. The thermal stability meant Dale could actually sleep comfortably through the night without waking every 2 hours to feed a stove. The heat stored in the soapstone kept the platform livable for 6 to 8 hours, even as the fire reduced to coals. By late November, word had spread beyond Eagle River. A reporter from the Lakeland Times came out, took photographs, and ran a feature titled, "Local Hunters' Crazy Shelter Proves Smarter Than Expected." The article included Dale's temperature logs and fuel consumption data. Within days, Dale started receiving visitors, hunters, builders, even a mechanical engineering professor from the university in Stevens Point who wanted to study the thermodynamics of the system. The professor, Dr. Raymond Kellerman, brought instrumentation and spent a weekend taking measurements. His conclusion, published later in a regional engineering journal, validated everything Dale had discovered through trial and observation. The system demonstrates approximately 73% thermal efficiency in heat delivery from combustion source to occupied space, comparable to modern forced air furnaces and superior to most wood-burning stoves in similar applications. Dale had done more than build a warm hunting shelter. He'd accidentally engineered one of the most efficient off-grid heating systems anyone in northern Wisconsin had ever seen. And he'd done it with salvaged materials, basic tools, and a stubborn refusal to accept that uncommon meant impossible. The transformation happened faster than anyone expected. By December 1979, 3 other hunters in the Eagle River area had begun constructing elevated shelters using Dale's heat duct principle. By the end of the 1980 hunting season, that number had grown to 12. But the real diffusion began when Martin Schaefer, the mason who'd initially dismissed Dale's design, started offering to build the fireboxes professionally. He'd been so impressed by the thermal efficiency that he developed a standardized firebox kit, pre-cut fire brick, a welded door assembly, and detailed instructions for proper duct installation. "I spent 30 years building fireplaces the same way my father taught me," Schaefer told a customer in the spring of 1980. "That a machinist with no masonry training showed me I'd been thinking too small. That's humbling, but it's also exciting." By 1981, 23 elevated shelters incorporating Dale's heat duct system had been built within a 50-mile radius of Eagle River. Some were hunting platforms, like Dale's original. Others were ice fishing shelters, raised observation posts for wildlife photography, and even one remote cabin used by a Forest Service fire spotter. Each iteration refined the concept. One builder added a secondary thermal mass using stacked granite stones around the register. Another experimented with double-walled ductwork that created an air gap for even better insulation. A trapper north of Rhinelander built a version that used 2 separate ducts, one for heat delivery, one for combustion air return, creating a closed-loop system that was even more efficient than Dale's original design. But they all traced back to that first crazy platform in the woods west of Eagle River and to the quiet machinist who'd been willing to trust his calculations over conventional wisdom. The local conservation officer, Gary Hoffman, the same man who'd warned Dale about the dangers of his design, ended up writing a safety bulletin for the Department of Natural Resources that actually recommended elevated duct-heated shelters as safer alternatives to traditional ground blinds with interior stoves. The bulletin noted reduced carbon monoxide risk, elimination of interior combustion hazards, and superior thermal efficiency make properly constructed elevated duct systems a significant safety improvement for extended backcountry stays. By the mid-1980s, variations of Dale's design had spread across the upper Midwest. A hunting outfitter in Minnesota built a commercial version for his clients. A survival school in Michigan added the technique to their winter shelter curriculum. Even a few forward-thinking preppers and off-grid homesteaders began incorporating the principles into permanent structures. Dale himself never sought credit or profit. He shared his plans freely with anyone who asked, helped several builders troubleshoot their installations, and quietly returned to his routine. Second shift at the mill, maintenance on the lawn, and November through January in the woods. But something had shifted in Eagle River. The men who gathered at the corner tap on Friday nights started paying closer attention when someone proposed an unconventional idea. The phrase "that won't work" was more often followed by "why not?" instead of laughter. Vernon Mills, the carpenter who'd predicted Dale would freeze to death, built his own elevated shelter in 1982. When asked about his change of heart, he shrugged and said, "I was wrong. Happens more than I'd like to admit." The smart move is learning from it instead of defending it. Perhaps the most telling moment came in November 1985 during a particularly brutal cold snap that saw temperatures drop to -30. Dale was in his platform, warm and comfortable, when his walkie-talkie crackled to life. It was Martin Schaefer calling from his own elevated shelter 3 miles away. "Dale, you there?" "I'm here. I'm sitting in 72-degree warmth while it's 30 below outside, and I just wanted to say thank you. You taught an old mason that there's always something new to learn." "You're welcome," Dale said, "but I didn't invent anything. I just paid attention to how heat actually moves." And that, ultimately, was the lesson that outlasted the shelters themselves. The frontier had always belonged to people who observed carefully, thought independently, and tested their theories against reality rather than consensus. Dale Harrigan wasn't a trained engineer or a master builder. He was a millworker who understood that physics doesn't care about tradition. It only cares about what works. The men who'd laughed at his treehouse had made a common mistake. They'd confused familiarity with correctness. Because they'd never seen a duct-heated elevated shelter, they assumed it couldn't exist. Because Dale's approach contradicted their experience, they dismissed it without investigation. It had proven, once again, that dismissing unfamiliar knowledge as impossible often revealed not the limitations of the idea, but the limitations of our imagination. In the decades since, as modern technology has made backcountry heating easier and more sophisticated, Dale's original platform still stands in those woods west of Eagle River. The wood has grayed with age, and the firebox stones are stained with decades of smoke, but the system still works exactly as it did in 1979. And every November, when the first hard frost comes, someone, usually a younger hunter who's heard the story, makes the pilgrimage out to see it. They climb the ladder, examine the ductwork, and stand where Dale once stood, proving that 75 degrees of warmth in 20 below cold isn't crazy at all. It's just good engineering, tested by winter and proven by time. If this story taught you something new about heating, efficiency, or the value of testing unconventional ideas, hit that like button and subscribe for more forgotten wisdom from the frontier. And drop a comment. What's the most unconventional solution you've ever seen actually work? I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.